Hi there, I'm Renos Vakis, lead economist at the World Bank, and your host for Accelerating Development Ideas for Impact. This is not your typical podcast. It's an AI powered conversation brought to you by the World Bank Institute for Economic Development, where we unpack the latest research with one goal in mind, turning big ideas into real world impact. Let's get started.
Thank you for the introduction, Renos. Whenever we fill up our cars or pay a winter heating bill, we feel the weight of global energy markets right there in our wallets. Today on our show, we are looking at a region that is feeling that pressure on a massive scale, but is also trying to engineer its way out through some really fascinating policies. We are diving into the South Asia Economic Update, the latest edition of which is titled Working with Industrial Policy.
It is a brilliant starting point. South Asia is actually standing out right now as the fastest growing emerging market and developing economy region in the world. Of course, much of that robust performance is driven by India, which is the region's largest economy.
But that momentum is facing serious headwinds, isn't it? The report estimates regional economic growth will slow down from 7% in 2025 to 6.3% in 2026. And the cause for the slowdown really goes back to that energy bill feeling.
Exactly. The conflict in the Middle East and the resulting energy market disruptions poses big risks to South Asia's economies. The region relies so heavily on imported energy that persistently high prices are threatening to drive up inflation and erode real incomes. It also widens current account and fiscal deficits, and it saps an important export market. The Middle East accounts for 12.6% of South Asia's goods exports, and also a sizable share of tourist arrivals into some South Asian countries.
Which is why these governments are actively looking for new growth engines. And the first major shift we see toward growth is in trade openness. Historically, South Asia has been the least open region among emerging markets.
It is a striking contrast. Goods exports represented only around 12% of gross domestic product in 2024. That is half the share of their peers.
But that is changing quickly. India recently signed comprehensive free trade agreements with the United Kingdom and the European Union. That is a massive commitment. They're cutting tariffs on over 95% of traded goods. It essentially doubles the preferential global market access for India's domestic firms to 1/3 of the global economy.
And Sri Lanka is making significant moves as well. They plan to phase out major para-tariffs by 2029, including the Ports and Airport Development Levy. They are also phasing out the Commodity Export Subsidy Scheme. Removing those barriers represents a 9 percentage point cut in their average import duties.
I am curious what that actually means for the everyday person.
It means broad-based consumption and real income gains across the board. The largest benefits are actually expected for consumers of manufactured goods, particularly among rural households and, in Sri Lanka, poorer households.
So, cheaper goods are essentially improving daily life for the people who need it most. But lowering tariffs is only one side of the strategy. The other side is a massive surge in industrial policy. This part really surprised me. Between 2022 and 2025, South Asian countries implemented twice as many new industrial policies annually compared to the average emerging market and developing economy.
India even ranks among the top 10 globally for the sheer number of these policies. And it is fascinating to see where they are directing them.
Yes, about half of the region's new industrial policies targeted the manufacturing sector, which is interesting because manufacturing only accounts for 14% of employment in South Asia. It is also not the part of the economy that has created the most jobs. The services sector creates far more jobs in the region.
That contrast indeed is interesting. Another interesting fact I found is that South Asia relies much less on domestic subsidies compared to other developing countries.
Right, and that stems from the fact that the region's governments face much tighter budgets. Instead, India relies heavily on public procurement, which makes up 25% of its industrial policies.
While the rest of the region leans heavily on trade-related measures. Import restrictions account for 25% of South Asia's total new protective policies.
Some of our audience working in government or development may recognize these challenges immediately. It is always interesting to see if protective measures actually work in practice.
Actually, the track record is mixed in South Asia. The import restricting policies were followed by statistically significant declines in sectoral imports. They successfully kept foreign goods out. But export promoting measures, like domestic subsidies, failed to produce statistically significant gains in exports. That could be because stopping imports is an administrative action, but successfully supporting local firms to compete globally is a much harder reality to engineer.
And that reality is getting even more complicated with artificial intelligence. We have to talk about the AI shock to global value chains. The report finds that firms with high AI exposure experienced hiring declines relative to firms with low exposure.
And we see a 3.2% decline among multinational affiliates.
Picture a local business that supplies services to a foreign company. If that foreign buyer adopts AI, it immediately impacts the local supplier.
That is the cross-border spillover effect. South Asian suppliers whose foreign buyers had high AI exposure experienced a 10% reduction in hiring relative to firms with less AI exposure.
10% is a massive drop in demand for automatable business functions.
It is. And it compounds an existing problem, which is extreme wage fragmentation within these countries.
Yes, the subnational wage differences.
The report shows that in the larger countries, worker characteristics like education only account for about 1/5 of these wage differences, which means the remaining wage premiums come down to location. The highest wages are concentrated in regions with superior transport connectivity, skilled workforces, larger firms, and more services sector activity.
It is entirely self-reinforcing. Good infrastructure attracts bigger firms, which pay higher wages, which in turn attracts more skilled workers.
Exactly. Which brings us to the solutions. Policymakers must navigate all this, but they are constrained by limited fiscal space. Tax revenues in the region are below the emerging market average, and debt is high. They cannot just spend their way out of the problem. So the priority has to be broad-based, cross-cutting reforms. That means improving physical transport networks, digital connectivity, and the regulatory business environment.
Building the foundations first makes sense. But when they do use targeted interventions, the report suggests focusing on first-choice industrial policies.
Yes, measures that directly address market failures without heavy distortions. A great example is the use of industrial parks.
Like India's plug-and-play parks in Tamil Nadu. I really like that concept. It alleviates land and finance constraints for electronics manufacturing.
And it removes the friction for businesses. Another critical priority is skills development programs tailored to upgrade workforces for AI complementary roles. And finally, market access and quality infrastructure. Helping firms meet standardization and accreditation requirements so they can boost export competitiveness.
It really sounds like South Asia is at a turning point, moving from closed markets toward open trade and highly strategic investments.
It truly is. When we step back from the specific trade figures and AI data, the big picture is incredibly hopeful. If governments focus their limited resources on building solid physical and digital infrastructure, they can overcome external energy shocks. It is about creating a foundational environment where everyday businesses have the tools they need to thrive on the global stage. Over to you, Rinos.
Thank you for joining us. You can find the full report on our website. Just follow the link in the description. Be sure to subscribe to be the first to know about upcoming episodes. And before you go, how do you plan to put what you learn into practice? And what topics you'd like us to explore next? We'd love to know. Until then, goodbye.